Hello guys, you're welcome to uComputing's YouTube channel. My name is Eugene, and in this video we're going to have a look at how we can set up an Azure Virtual Desktop, formerly known as Windows Virtual Desktop. In order for you to set up an Azure Virtual Desktop, you need to make sure you have an Azure account. That's the first thing, and you also have an Azure subscription. Okay, so I'm going to use my MSDN platform subscription today for this demo. So the first thing that you need to do before you do anything else is that you need to create a resource group. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the resource group blade and go click on create here. Okay, so I'm going to give my resource group a name. I'm going to call it UAVD-RG. I'm going to let it be in the East US region, which is the default region, and click on create. I'm going to click on create here again. Okay, my resource group is created, UAVD resource group. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a virtual network within this resource group. So I'm going to click on the virtual network blade and go click on create. It's going to give me an option to select the resource group I want to place this virtual network in. So I'm going to place it in the UAVD resource group, which is the resource group I'm going to use to provision my Azure Virtual Desktop. The next thing is that I'm going to give this virtual network a name. I'm going to call it UAVD-VNet. I'm going to go next here, and I'm going to leave the default IP address space and then the default subnet. If you want to customize it, it's okay. You can type in an address space that you want and then create a new subnet if you want and get rid of the default. So I'm going to click on next here and then make sure I leave the security details at the default and go next to tags, go next again and create. Okay, validation passed. I'm going to click on create. This is going to create a VNet called UAVD VNet in my UAVD resource group for me. So I'm going to click create here. We check the progress. Still in progress. Okay, looks like the deployment is complete, so I'm going to click on close here, and then the next step is to provision our Azure Virtual Desktop. So I'm going to click on my Azure Virtual Desktop blade over here. This is not here by default, so if you don't find your Azure Virtual Desktop blade over here, you can always use the search field. So I'm going to type here Azure Virtual Desktop and it comes up. I'm going to click on Azure Virtual Desktops. The first thing that you want to do is that do not worry yourself trying to create the instances that makes up the Azure Virtual Desktops one after the other. Okay, it's going to get you confused. If this is your first time of creating an Azure Virtual Desktop, always make sure you start from the overview blade. Okay, and you go for create a host pool. But you need to make sure you have already created your resource group. Don't jump that portion. You need to make sure you've created your resource group and then your virtual network for this deployment before you get to the site. So when you're done with that, as we finish ours, you just go to the overview blade and you click on create a host pool. Now when you go to create a host pool, it's going to give you an option to select the resource group you want to create this host pool in. Okay, so you're going to go for your UAVD-RG. If you're following the same steps with the same strings, you go for the UAVD resource group that we created earlier on, and then you give your host pool a name. Okay, I'm going to call this uHostPool01. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure it's in the East US region. I'm not going to enable validation. This is just for testing before deployment mechanism that has been placed on this deployment wizard, but this is just for learning purpose, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, now the host pool type, we have two options. In this video I'm going to go for personal, and if this is your first time of creating an Azure Virtual Desktop, I recommend you also use the same host pool type. And then we have two assignment options. We have direct and then we have automatic. Now you can leave this at the default. What is going to happen is that if you leave the assignment type at automatic, when you create a user in the Azure AD tenant and then you assign the role of desktop virtualization user or desktop virtualization admin, automatically that user is going to be assigned to the host pool that we have on your Microsoft Azure. I'm going to go next here, and then I'm going to add a virtual machine to this host pool. Okay, so I'm going to go to yes over here and then create a virtual machine for the host pool and then give it a prefix. I'm going to call this one UAVD01, and this name has to be unique within the resource group as it's been indicated over here. I'm going to leave the region to be at East US, and I'm not going to enable any redundancy option because it's just for training purpose. If you are doing this in the production environment, you want to enable some availability options to make sure your Azure Virtual Desktop instance is backed up on multiple data centers. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to talk about the security options available. We have two security options available. One is much stronger than the other. I'm going to use the standard because it's just for training purposes. And then the image type. Okay, if you have your operating system images within a storage blob, you can select this option and go browse and select it. I don't have any image type within a storage blob. I'm going to pick an image from the gallery that Microsoft has provided for us. So I'm going to go for the drop down menu over here and select the OS type. Now, if the operating system you want to deploy alongside this AVD is not available on this list, you can always use see all images option over here, and you're going to get other images, okay, aside these ones that have been listed over here. I'm going to close and leave the default 8 GB memory and 2 CPUs, which is the standard D2S V3 virtual machine size, and then give the number of instances of virtual machines I want to create for this AVD. I'm going to just create one, but you can feel free to create 2 VMs to provision this particular AVD if you want. The cheapest storage type available is the standard HDD, because HDD is old, is slow. The IOPS of HDD, we all know, is very slow. So if you want your Azure Virtual Desktops to have high IOPS, you need to make sure you use an SSD. Okay, so I'm going to go for a standard SSD disk type, and then I'm going to disable boot diagnostics. You can enable this if you're doing this on a production environment. And then my virtual network, I'm going to go for the virtual network that I created for this resource group, which is UAVD VNet. That is what you need to do. And then the security, network security group type, I'm going to leave it at basic. I'm not going to open any firewall ports, and I'm going to select Azure Active Directory to make sure that after this provisioning, the virtual machine will be joined to my Azure AD. I'm not going to enroll my VM in Intune, it's fine. But this virtual machine needs to have a virtual machine administrator account, just like any regular OS. Okay, we need a built-in admin account. So I'm going to call this uadmin and then give it a password. The password needs to be minimum 12 characters, and it has to be a complex password, or else Azure is going to reject it. I'm not going to put any custom configuration in here from an Azure Resource Manager template. So I'm going to go next to the workspace option, and I'm going to create a workspace. I have one workspace available that I can just provision this AVD into, but I'm going to create a new one, especially for my new AVD that I'm creating. So I'm going to call this one workspace 02 and go OK here. And then I'm going to go next. I'm not going to enable diagnostic settings. I'm going to go next. I'm not going to use tags. So I'm going to click next here. It's going to validate all the inputs that are provided, and it tells me validation passed. The next thing is to go ahead and click create here. So I'm going to click create to begin the deployment process. Now this takes quite a while. It's not like creating a normal virtual machine in Microsoft Azure. It's going to take a while to finish the deployment process. From my experience, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So if it's taking longer than that, it could be that the options that you provided is a lot, like maybe you're telling it to create more virtual machines or something else. It could also be that the input options that you provided, some of them are invalid, so you can bounce back and tell you that there's an error. So you have to give it a couple of minutes. So I'm going to just hold on for a bit and see how this deployment go, after which I'll resume the video and then we're going to test it. All right, as you can see, the deployment is complete. We're going to test it now. So I'm going to go to my Azure Virtual Desktops plate. If you're wondering how I pinned it to my portal menu, this is how I did it. When you go to your home screen, if you see any option over here and you hover your mouse over it, there's an option over here to add it to favorite, and it's going to be pinned over here. So I'm going to go to my Azure Virtual Desktops plate and go to Workspaces. Now when I go to Workspaces, as you can see, I have one workspace that is associated with my UAVD-RG. So I'm going to click on that. And then when I scroll down to application groups and click on it, as you can see, the host pool that we created is here. When I click on that, as you can see, we have one application in here with 2 assignments. Okay, so let's see what are the assignments that we have. As you can see, this host pool has a user called Vida associated with that host pool automatically. Now, how did this happen? The reason why this user has been associated with this host pool is that this user, let's go find out the type of role that it's having. You remember previously I mentioned that if you set your host pool type to personal automatic, it automatically assigns anybody within the Azure AD tenants that has a group membership of desktop virtualization user. So let's see, I'm going to go to Vida and check assign roles. It's just a regular user. Now when I go to the RBAC roles, which is the Azure role assignment, as you can see, this user is a desktop virtualization user. That is the RBAC role that it's having. So this is the reason why this user has been automatically assigned to that host pool. Okay, we're going to test again for the automatic assignment and see if it works by creating a new user. So I'm going to go to Azure Active Directory and then go to users over here. I'll show you how that user was assigned so that if you don't have a user, you can do it by yourself. Okay, so I'm going to come here and click on new user and click on create a new user. This user shouldn't necessarily be an admin. It can be just a regular user. So I'm going to create a new user, call this user Scott, and I'm going to leave the name as Scott and then call the first name Scott, starting with capital S, and then I'm going to set a password for it by typing my password. I'm going to go create. You can leave the rest options here at the default and click create. Now when I create this new user, Azure takes a while to refresh its portal, so it's going to take a while before it shows over here. So we're going to go ahead and assign the desktop virtualization user RBAC role to this new Scott user that we've created. I'm going to go to subscriptions. Again, I've pinned my subscriptions option to the portal menu. If you don't have yours here, you can go to cost management and billing, and we have the subscription option here. And when you click on this, you're going to see that you have your subscription over here. Click on the subscription, and this is where you need to assign your user that role. So I'm going to go to AIM or access control. This is where we assign rollback access control roles or RBAC roles. So you click on AIM on this subscription and you can use this option over here, or you can click here, add role assignment. And then we are looking for desktop virtualization user role. You can also use desktop virtualization admin, but I don't want to give privilege beyond what is necessary. So I'm going to just type desktop virtualization. And then when I scroll down over here, as you can see, I have desktop virtualization user. I'm going to select that RBAC role and go to next, and then add my new Scott user. Okay, so I'm going to click here and go for Scott. Because we've set the host pool to automatically assign anybody who is having a role like this to our host pools automatically, this user is going to be assigned without our intervention. So I'm going to go select here and go next and go review and assign, and then I'm going to go back to my Azure Virtual Desktop plate and go to workspaces, select my workspace, go to application groups, click my host pool, and then I'm going to check the assignment here. As you can see, automatically Scott is assigned to this host pool. If for some reason you have a user in Azure AD and you want to add or assign that user to this host pool, you can go ahead and click add here and then look for the user. Okay, so if I want to add this user, I can do so. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. As you can see, these users have been assigned to this host pool, but they are not having any VM assigned to themselves. So we need to fix this as well. Okay, so I'm going to go here back to my Azure Virtual Desktop Blade, and I'm going to go for host pool. Click on host pool, the host pool that I'm working on. As you can see, I have one virtual machine over here, and it says there's no problem here. When you have one virtual machine and then it says one virtual machine, one unavailable, there's a problem. Okay, and normally you can resolve this issue by restarting the virtual machine that is associated with this host pool. Okay, and I'm going to show you how you can fix that. It's a common error that you normally see when you are deploying an Azure Virtual Desktop. So when you get an error showing that the virtual machine is unavailable on a host pool, this is what you need to do. You go to the virtual machines blade and you look for the virtual machine that is associated with that particular host pool. In our case, it's this guy over here. So I'm going to click on this, and then all you need to do is to click on this button over here to restart. And after a restart, when you go back to the host pool, everything is going to be resolved. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my Azure Virtual Desktop Blade and then click on host pool again. And then click on uhost pool 01, which is the host pool that we're currently working on. And then I'm going to click on the virtual machines option here, total virtual machines. So I click on this one over here, and it tells me I can go ahead and assign a user to this Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. Okay, so I'm going to click on this assign here, and as you can see, the two users that have been automatically enrolled in this host pool are available. It's not showing the other users we have in Azure AD because they have not been assigned to this host pool. Okay, so I'm going to go for Scott and go assign. Once this is done, you go click OK here. Don't forget to click the OK, and it says assign to session host. Okay, now let's go back and go to our workspaces. Click on workspace 2 and then go check out our application group. I'm going to click on this host pool, check on my assignments, and as you can see, Scott is having one VM assigned to it. Okay, so it can be a little bit confusing when you're using this particular portal for the first time. So try and play around here, and you're going to get used to it. Okay, so now we're going to test if Scott can actually log in to this host pool and then access the virtual machine available. And the cool thing about Azure Virtual Desktop is that it allows you to access your AVD through a browser. So any browser that is having HTML5 compatibility can be used to connect to an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool and access a virtual machine. Okay, so let's move on. The next step is to go to this URL over here. You're going to access the remote desktop web client for Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktops, so you can keep the URL in mind. I'm going to click on this. I've already bookmarked it in my browser. So when I click on this, it gives me the option to log in with one of these accounts. I'm going to click on add another user and type the URL for this guy over here. Scott at, okay, let me just copy it. I don't want to have any typographical errors. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and go next. Now when I go next, it asks me to provide the password that we specified for this user in Azure AD. And anytime you log on for the first time, it's going to prompt you to, okay, it seems I'm having a password issue here. I'm going to reset this password in Azure AD. It's a common problem, so let's go ahead and fix it. I'm going to go to the users option here, and I'm going to click on Scott user and go ahead and reset this password. Okay, it's going to give me a temporary password, so I'm going to click on reset password. It gives me a temporary password. I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. Then it asks me to provide that password again. I'm going to do Control V to paste and then assign a new password. Now the password over here has to be 12 characters long. It's not like the one that we set previously in Azure AD. Azure AD will allow you to set a password for a user that is not up to 12 characters. At least 8 characters is going to work fine. But if you want to set a password for a user that is associated with an AVD and a host pool, it has to be minimum 12 characters. That is why I've increased the number of characters over here. I'm going to go sign in here. We're in. It tells us over here that there are 2 workspaces available, and this is the one that we created, workspace 2. So I'm going to go to session desktop over here, and then just like a normal remote desktop connection, it asks you if you want to share your clipboard, do a file transfer, enable printers, and so on and so forth. I'm going to go allow here, and it asks me to provide a username and a password. Now you remember that we created a virtual machine admin password for this virtual desktop. That's what I'm going to use. Okay, so I'm going to go type uadmin over here and type my password and go submit. Yay! Everything works, and oh yeah, we are in. It's going to take a while to prepare the desktop because it's just like you performing a normal installation and booting onto your computer and trying to log in for the first time. The first logon takes quite a while, so if you experience that, it's normal. Just be patient and wait for the logon process to complete, and you can access your virtual machine from anywhere around the world. That is how cool Azure Virtual Desktops are, and it works in the browser. You don't need to pick up your laptop. If you have an Azure Virtual Desktop to work, you can access your PC in the cloud wherever you are. I'm going to click next over here to finish the configuration, and boom, we are in. Okay, a full-blown Windows 11 operating system running in the cloud on an Azure Virtual Desktop. And the cool thing is that there are other images that comes with Office 365. You can also deploy those if you want. So you can have your Office 365, you can have all your business applications in here using. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to see you in the next video. If you love this video, kindly subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you.